Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are going to be making another dragon piece. Now for this dragon piece, I wanted to combine the theme, so it's kind of based off of a Venus flytrap and a bear trap. So I thought it'd be really cool if it was like a dragon that would like bury itself and the little spiky Venus thing would be the only thing that you would see, and then they would go Anyways, let's get started on today's project. Okay, so for our trapper dragon, I am actually going to only be making one clay piece, which is going to be the head. I actually have a mold that'll work really well for the feet, so I'm going to end up casting everything for those, and then we can paint those when we paint the clay head. Now before we get started on our clay head, I want to make a few spikes to go on to the top of the clay head. So for this, I have a few pieces of wire cut to a couple different lengths, and I'm going to start covering these in clay. So I'm going to roll out some strips of clay, I'm going to slide them over the pieces of wire, and then I'm going to smooth my clay to make just kind of a little spike. I don't want to add any texture or anything to it. I want to kind of make it look sharp without making it actually sharp. Once I'm done sculpting the spikes, I'm going to bake them for a small amount of time, just about 20 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. Just enough baking that way that they don't distort when we add them to the clay head. Now while those are baking, we can start work on our clay head. So I have my lump of tin foil. I'm going to start covering this in a thin layer of clay, blending it and trying to get just a basic shape to work with. Once I have a basic shape laid out for the head, I can start adding the details like the eyes. For the eyes, I didn't really have any glass eyes that I wanted to use for this piece, so I'm just going to use clay for them. So I'm going to mark out where I want my eyes, and then I'm going to roll some balls of clay to use as the eyeballs. Once I have those placed, I can lay out some strips of clay for the eyelids, for the top and bottom. Next, I'm going to figure out where the mouth is going to go. So I'm going to roughly sketch it out, and once I like how it's laid out, I can use my tools to clean up the line. Now at this point, I really wasn't sure what else I wanted to do with the face, so I decided to start adding some detail while I thought about it. So I'm just going to make some indentions under the eyes and start shaping the head a little bit more, and then adding a scale texture to the eyelids. After I was done adding a little bit of detail, I decided I was going to finally add the spikes to the top of the head. So for this, I cut the wires that were sticking out of them a little shorter, and then I'm just going to push them into the clay head and blend the clay into the spikes. So I'm going to have basically 2 rows of 3, so they're going to kind of go over the brow of the eye. Once I have the spikes in place, I'm just going to start adding some more clay here and there and adjusting the shape of the head, and I'm going to start adding more detail, just more scales, texture, wrinkles, just whatever I want to throw onto the face. And then once I'm happy with how the clay head looks, I'm going to put this in the oven for about 45 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. And then once it's done baking and it's cold to touch, we can start painting that. Along with the resin feet that I casted ahead of time, that way they were ready to take out of the mold today and we can work with them the same time that we paint the head. I like to paint everything all at once. Normally you tend to use the same colors for a piece with all their clay pieces or resin pieces, so it's just easier to mix up all the paint at once and do them together than it is to try and match colors later. Every now and again a piece will have clay pieces that I don't need to match, but it's pretty rare. Anyways, what I'm going to do right now is primer all of my pieces, that way they're all the same green color that I want to work with. So I'm just doing a flat green color that is very similar to the fabric that we're going to use for the body. I tried to match it as best I could. Once I have a solid layer of green on everything and it's dried, I can then start adding different colors. So I'm going to start adding a little bit of a brighter green, and I'm also going to start adding some shadows. Now for the top of the head, I want to add some darker reds and even a few bits of bright red to it. And the main reason for this is because it's going to be part of the Venus flytrap portion that's going to be on the back. And I'm going to end up using a decent amount of red with that, and I want it to match with that. So I'm going to start adding that color and just kind of figuring out how I want to blend it into the greens and where I want to add it and where I don't want to add it. So one thing that I've started to do with painting that I haven't usually done before is with my shadows, I've been adding a decent amount of water to the black and kind of watering it down. And I'm not sure why I decided to start doing this, but I kind of like it. It blends a little bit differently and it just works really well. I don't have to worry about my shadows being really, really dark. Usually if you just go straight in with black, you got something really dark. And this gives me a way of kind of slowly diving into the shadows instead of just going like head first in. Now for the highlights, I'm going to be picking parts of the face that I want to draw attention to. So one of those things is the spikes, so I'm going to kind of lighten those up, that way you can kind of see them a little bit better, because I feel like they just blend into each other too much right now. And then I'm going to also add a little bit of a brighter green around the eyes and around the mouth. Now for painting the feet, these are going to be actually pretty easy. Most of the things I'm doing is just adding a bit of a shadow and a bit of a highlight to the ends of the toes, just kind of messing around with those a little bit, and then I'm going to paint the claws black to finish them up. Now painting the clay and resin pieces isn't the only thing we're going to be painting. I'm actually going to be painting the fabric pieces as well to kind of dingy them up a little bit and make them look a little bit more natural, because the colors are just a tiny bit too bright in my opinion. For some pieces it works, but for this piece I just want it to be a little bit darker. Now obviously I'm going to have to wait for our fabric pieces to dry. I'm going to use a heat gun to kind of speed everything up, but it does still take quite a while to get everything completely dry to start sewing. Now after seeing all of the fabric pieces, you're probably curious on what the pattern looks like, because we haven't shown that yet, and it's honestly just as confusing as seeing the fabric pieces without it. I find that patterns for reptile-shaped bodies tend to be very confusing looking, but I tried to lay everything out to where you can see it as best as possible. So I've got the main body, and then I've also got all the Venus flytrap parts that are going to go on the back. So I'm going to start with the Venus flytrap pieces first, and basically one side is going to be green and the inside portion is going to be red. So I'm going to sandwich these two layers together and we're going to sew around these. And for the trapper pieces, we pretty much have a smaller set and a larger set. I thought a layering effect would look really cool with this part of the dragon. So I'm going to get all the trapper pieces sewn with my sewing machine. If you noticed, I don't have all the individual like spike sections cut out, and that's because I find it a lot easier to sew these first and then cut away the excess fabric. So once I get everything sewn, I'm going to cut that away and then we can flip everything right side out. And now what I'm going to do is actually put the dragons back together with all the spikes first. And the main reason I'm doing it this way is because I want all of these spikes to be poseable, and it's going to be easier to assemble this separately than it is to assemble it when we're assembling the dragon. So I have wires cut for each individual spike, which is a lot of them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hot glue gun and I'm going to fill the fabric spike with hot glue and insert the wire. I'm going to do this to all of them, and it took me quite a while to do all of this. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to start sewing the back portions together. So I'm going to start with the very middle piece of the red fabric for the back, and then I'm going to take the longer, shorter spike sections and I'm going to start sewing them on each side. Now, sewing these into place took me a lot longer than it normally takes me to sew because of all the wires sticking out. My thread would catch on to absolutely everything during each stitch. So it took me forever to get the hang of sewing these with all the little pieces of wire in place, but I had to have the wires in place to do what I was doing. After that, I'm going to take all of the wires that I have sticking out and I'm going to make sure that they're cut to the correct length, and I'm going to add loops to the very end of them. And the reason for this is because I'm going to take another piece of wire and combine everything. So I'm going to run this piece of wire through all of the loops and just add everything so it's all connected. To make it easier to stuff the body when we start putting everything together, I'm going to add stuffing under all of these wires. It's just going to make less to do when I put everything together. So the next thing that I need to do is actually the sewing for the legs. So each leg, each front leg and back leg has an inside portion and an outside portion. I left the inside portion a little bit darker to kind of go with the belly fabric. And I'm just going to sew down the fronts of all of these. Then I can take them and I can mark out where I want to connect them to the body and sew them in place on the body. Okay, so we have the back of the dragon all assembled, and now we can start putting together the rest of him. So I have a wire frame for the body itself, and what we're going to do is we're going to start putting everything on this wire frame, starting with the clay head. So I'm going to add some glue to the back of the head, and I'm going to run the wire for the neck into the back of the head. We're going to let that dry a little bit, and then we can take the fabric for the neck, which is pretty much connected to the back of the dragon, and we're going to start gluing that around the base of the head. I'm also going to take the fabric for the belly and glue the neck portion of that to the bottom portion of the head. I'm going to let that dry a little bit as well, and then once that's dried we can start sewing and stuffing and closing everything up. So I'm going to start with the neck and I'm going to sew down both sides of it and stuff that. And then once we get to the front legs, we're going to need to take our resin feet for those legs and add them to the wire frame. So I'm going to adjust the wires to the correct length for the wire frame. I always leave them a little bit longer than necessary just to be safe. And then we're just going to be gluing these into place. If you notice, I have some holes now in the back of my resin pieces, and I ended up just drilling this with a normal drill. So I'm going to glue these to the ends of the wire, and then I can take the fabric for the legs and I can glue it around the bases of the feet. And then I can start stuffing and closing up the back of those legs, and then we can continue going down the belly. And then once we get to the back legs, we're basically going to do the same thing, adjust the length of the wire, add the resin pieces to the ends of the wire, glue everything together, and sew and stuff it. And then once the back legs are done, we're just going to be doing the same thing to the tail, closing everything up. Okay, so our trapper dragon is all put together, and now we're going to finish up the rest of the details that I want to throw on. So I'm going to add a little bit more paint. I'm going to decorate the sides a little bit more and just kind of add more shadows. He just looks still too bright for what I want, so I'm going to just kind of mess around with that a little bit. And then I'm also going to take some 3D fabric paint and start adding some texture to the fabric as well. I'm also gluing in a few spikes here and there just because it felt like it needed a little bit more. Okay guys, and here is our finished Venus flytrap dragon. I had so much fun with this piece, and my favorite part, weirdly enough, is just like the little back legs and his tiny tail. I just love that, along with his little belly. I think that part is just adorable. I know it really should be like the spiky bits and everything, but I just love the shape of his body, and I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna definitely use this pattern and make something else, but very different. Anyways, our little chubby boy is going to be on my website, so if anyone wants to give him a new home, you can check the links down below. Along with the links to my website and my RedBubble and everything else, you'll find links to a bunch of different art supplies that I like to use to make my art dolls. So if you're interested in just seeing what I use, or if you want to buy some stuff and make your own art dolls, I've got that down there for you. Now these are affiliated links, so if you do buy anything through them, it does help support the channel. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, to all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!